Authenticity. Do you be authentic? It feels as if being real is a buzzword or maybe a fleeting moment in time. But what does one do when their authentic self is offensive or maybe offensive to others? We're going to talk about it. Hello and welcome to Ladies Listen Up. I am your host, Gwendolyn G.R. Houston Jack. And I know that like all of you, you have heard for the past 1, 2, maybe 3 years about the power of being authentic, living one's authentic life, showing up in authenticity. Yeah, we say it so often. I'm thinking at this point, it really is a buzzword. So I figured, why not bring on a special guest who can help us walk through this conversation and really talk about how to still show up as your authentic self, even if, I should say if and when, your authentic self may be just a tad offensive to a few others. So let's get Let's get ready to welcome our special guest. Oh, I'm excited about this conversation. I want to welcome you all to Aicila Lewis. So excited to have her here. How are you, ma'am? How are you doing?
Oh, I'm really excited to be here. I love your intro music. I'm like dancing to it.
It makes you want to sort of, get in the groove.
It's really great.
So before we get started, I want everyone to know who you are. So I am going to, because people, trust me, we have someone who's going to bring a great deal of information to us. So let me introduce to you Aicila Lewis, who prefers she and they. She brings 20 plus years of leadership to her role as the founder and director of motivation at Bicurian Consulting. She is also a community organizer who was awarded a congressional certificate of special recognition. She served as the executive director for 2 LGBTQ serving nonprofits, has been the organizational strategist for multiple organizations, and is committed to supporting and amplifying the work of mission-driven organizations. Between her work leading these groups and her involvement in other initiatives, Aicila has learned the power of leading with compassion and the vital role equity plays in creating work that endures. Let's welcome Aicila to Ladies Listen Up. We are excited. I am excited.
I'm excited. She sounds really cool.
My dear, you are very cool, just in case you didn't know. So before we start, I want to thank you for sharing your experience with us because, when I think about showing up authentically, right? For some people, I have heard them use the phrase, you're too much, right? And so when people discuss being themselves, but being whole in different settings and places and spaces, sometimes I believe we find ourselves dimming our lights a little bit. Would you say that's something that's possible?
I absolutely have experienced that. It can be a challenge to navigate how to show up as yourself and also not feel like you're too much or you're causing to being fussy. That's one I don't like. I like to be fussy.
So, knowing that we're going to have this conversation, we are going to talk about authenticity and the guest filter. Oh, Okay. All right. So I'm going to let you be our dictionary for the evening. I'm going to
Awesome.
let you do it. So it's okay because everybody has their own way of looking at things, but I feel like you can really sum this up for us. So, can you start with a quick definition, if you will,
Mhm.
of authenticity? And after that, share with us how you live an authentic life.
I will do my best to respond well to this question. Thank you. So I do start actually with the dictionary, and authenticity is defined as not false or copied, genuine and real. So that's a pretty straightforward, simple
Hmm.
definition.
Okay.
In the context of what our conversation is going to be, in terms of relating with humans, I was thinking about it from the perspective of recognizing that when we can show up in connection with our values, which are usually
Mm,
a deeper level of
mm,
who we are,
mm,
instead of how we express them, that is, and not instead of, but like not focusing on what we express, how we express our values,
mhm,
instead focusing on what
mhm,
those values are. I feel like that's one of the ways that we can live an authentic life or be authentic in a situation without compromising something that's really meaningful to who we are or purpose, while also respecting that space in between for other
mm,
people to be. There's caveat, caveat, caveat. So for folks that are like, but absolutely, you're, and I'm not talking to you. If you're like, but it doesn't apply to me, then I'm not talking to you. I promise.
mhm.
I'm not talking to the people for whom that resonates and who they
Mhm,
sense that as a feeling like, oh, okay, yeah, I know what that looks like. And part of what brought me to the show with you is, well, I was sharing about my dad, and I came out as a queer woman more than 2 decades ago, and my dad is a Republican Mormon, uh, 70-plus-year-old man living in southern Utah, and we're still really close. And it's actually interesting because I have another friend who's a similar situation, and she and I were talking this weekend about how people will like, well, why do you want to spend time with your dad when he's so different? And I was like, and so she and I kind of had that conversation again, and I was just like, well, because we love them, and
mm,
and regardless of where my dad stands politically, he and I have very similar values. We express
mhm,
them differently, and
mm,
and sometimes that's where we'll come to odds. We're both very quick to offer our opinion, and so there's definitely been those heated conversations. And we also deeply value our love for each other and our family, and
mm,
we both really value service. And so we serve in different ways. I served obviously as in the nonprofit world. He serves in his church. The value that brings us both to that is service. So we can connect on the importance of service. We can connect on the importance of community. There's a lot of ways that we can engage. And so it's a little bit of a deviation from your question, but for me, that's really what I've learned that really does work for me is really noticing, okay, one, what is this relationship to me? If it's
mhm,
really worth the
mhm,
discomfort of doing the work, because that's what it is. It's doing the work. And and is it a place that I can connect on our values? There are some people who are actually really great folks in the world that we don't share values, and it's hard to connect with them, period. Like, because
mm.
that's a big part of how I show up in the world, is trying to live into those values. So that would be how I would say I do my best. And let's be clear, I don't get it right. There's no such thing as getting it right in my view.
No.
I do my best, and then I notice how that showed up, and then I maybe adjust a little, and then I try again. So
I believe when you said connecting with the values versus, if you will, looking at how we express them, I think that's key. I shouldn't say that. I believe that is key. Because when I think about some of the people that I have watched, and oh, God, I'm trying to find the gracious words, so work with me here.
for sure.
But when people talk about being authentic, but I also feel as if there is this sort of want to take the spotlight.
Hmm.
It's like clearly that can't be all that you're about. There's got to be something else. Because if you really love someone, you're going to put on that guest filter and you're going to, as you say, connect on what really brings you two together. right? Like your values bring you together. Clearly, servant leadership is part of your family values too.
Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, it's clearly there. You're like you said, he's serving in the church, you're serving in nonprofits, but it is still serving others.
Yeah.
There is a way to still be yourself and not feel as if you've got to, because like no one's gonna ever really be 100% in unison. I mean, we're all individuals.
Mhm.
We all have our own thing. So I absolutely love how you discussed that and how you shared how you and your father connect on that one. And if we have time, I want to go back to we may have to come off the screen and talk about that other thing. So let me make sure I stay focused because I can easily go down a different rabbit hole. But tell me this, because you said that you came out, is it 2 decades ago?
More
Yes,
than that, yeah.
more than that. So when did you decide to focus on your joy and be who you are today? And did that decision impact any of your relationships?
I mean, I'll say the second one first. All of them, starting with a relationship with myself, and
Mm-hmm.
that I can remember the first step that I can identify taking in that direction was coming out to myself and
Mm-hmm.
realizing that I could be quiet in my brain. I didn't have to run from that truth anymore, and I could just say, okay, this is something about me, and that was very calming. And and I would also say actually that it's something that I feel I have to recommit to often. It's very easy to slide into people pleasing or caretaking, partially because I do feel that strong desire to be of service to others in my community, and I don't want that to. I'm not interested in letting that go. However, it what you said earlier about the spotlight, I feel like the people pleasing, the caretaking can be like a fear response or an ego thing,
Yeah.
and so constantly recommitting to what is my value here. Where is this place of service? Am I putting myself into this in a way? Because that's not joy to me, right?
Yeah.
But it can be an easy thing to fall into. And I had a realization as well that, if I don't prioritize my life, no one else is going to. Like, it's actually my life. I am the one that has to be in charge of making it a priority. And it's hard sometimes. I had little kids, and I will, in this life as women, we get an expectation that, once again, if you have a joy in service, it's very easy to fall into.
Yep.
And so it can feel, and one of the things I noticed, like when my kids were younger, is because I felt so excited about them, I would actually put stuff off for them because I felt like it was like I was excited about it. I was like, that's dumb.
Mm.
It's just around. I'm going to do that first. And then just very practically, if I don't include my joy, my fulfillment, my life in some way, I will resent people.
Mm.
That's not their fault. And
Mm.
it's not really service. And it's absolutely something I'll do. So I have to constantly remember that if I really want to be this person in the world that shows up and makes a difference and is of service, it's part of that is making that commitment to my own fulfillment, my own mental and emotional health, my own self-expression, not as the only priority, as another priority.
Oh, that should be on a t-shirt. That should be on a t-shirt. Oh my. That is, it does put it into perspective because lately, as I should say, as of late,
Mm-hmm.
and I keep going back to, the pandemic was like a kick in the rear for a lot of us.
Mm-hmm.
And it just shook up some things and made most of us reevaluate some things. But when it comes to, as you say, recommitting to yourself, your joy, taking care of yourself, and that it is one of the priorities. It needs to be one of those priorities. It doesn't have to be an either or. We really can, I don't want to say do it all, but there is a way to balance
Mm-hmm.
everything. And I know people have talked about, pour from an empty cup, which is impossible.
Right.
It is impossible.
Mm-hmm.
There is no making more out of that. It's like this is empty and it's gone, right? Or as they typically talk about the sort of airplane
Yeah, the oxygen
scenario
mask.
when
Yeah.
the oxygen mask, right? Like you got to take care of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
but putting those priorities in order, That really should be on a t-shirt, sister. We're going to make you some merch. We're going to get you some
Love it.
merch committed before this is over. So let's keep going into that. Let's keep digging into that, because people do say that being authentic is impossible, that there's always this sort of mask that we're wearing. Now, I don't believe in masks, although I have seen it.
Mhm.
Social media, people are living this double life, and that's their business. That's their business. How they manage it, not really sure, because that's a lot of work if you ask me. But having to adjust your language or behavior, I don't see that as not being authentic. I see it as putting on a filter.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to go ahead and say it. I can say some things. I can. My mother is a retired minister. Out of respect for her and for the others in the room, I just put on a guest filter, right? So, what are your thoughts on that? Do you believe that, yes, you can still be authentic and wear a guest filter?
I will say a qualified yes, in that I absolutely, yes, I do believe that. And I also recognize that there are there's a personal place, like I was saying before, like there's your values and how you express them. And I also
Mhm.
feel like I think choice is a big part of it. So like if you're in a position of no power and you absolutely cannot be authentic around things that are truly a part of who you are,
Mhm.
I think that's a different scenario than the guest filter that you're talking about. So that's the distinction that I want to make is, if you're at work,
Mhm.
and this isn't as common now, but it's still common, and you're not allowed to, say, ask for a pagan holiday off because your boss is not supportive of that religion, or maybe a Muslim holiday. I would say in that place, being authentic might feel dangerous. And so
Mm.
it wouldn't feel like a guest filter so much as an armor.
Mm.
And I think
Oh,
armor is different and has a different impact on you. Whereas that what you're talking about, that guest filter. So like when I was talking about my dad, I actually just visited him for the holiday, and it's part of what led to us, I was talking about that. He had called me a few weeks before in the early October and was mentioning how I had just come up with one of his friends. And his friend was,
mm.
I was like, what about that? and, and he said, well, his friends' kids also weren't Mormon anymore. And he was asking my dad, how he navigated that, or if he had any advice. And my dad said, just love them and let them know they're
Mm.
welcome. And then he said, and I just want you to know, I know we have different beliefs, and I just love that we can talk about things, and that you're my daughter and you come and you get in my fridge. And I hope you know you're always welcome. And I'm like, well, your fridge is full of good food. That's the whole point, being a dad. Uh, but the fact that he would go out of his way to make sure to say that to me, that's what I mean
Mm.
when I say there's a value, and I have a choice. Like I came out,
Mm.
he knows what my life is. I don't have to emphasize it over and over again. He even made a joke one year. I said I was gonna come out for Thanksgiving. He's like, "Didn't you already do that?" I was just like, "What happened?" um, and and that's not to say I'm not going to pretend that it's always easy. There are times when it's been
Yeah.
contentious. I felt like it was really contentious the last few years in a way that was
Mm.
unproductive. And I was like, we're not going to convince each other of anything, and we're not connecting. So I gave myself a
Mm.
challenge that I wouldn't argue with him, and I wouldn't lie to him. I wasn't going to say I was okay with something or believe something, but I also wasn't going to argue. And he called me to tell me something about something in politics, and I was like, how do I respond to this? And finally, I just said, I really love that you call me when you're excited to share something, because I am. I'm glad that he thinks about me.
And we do know that there are certain holidays or certain family events where I have read the advice is don't even bring this up if you want to keep a happy home. If you don't, but I gotta feel like at some point, and it's hard, at some point, we have to be able to meet in the middle and have a conversation
Mhm.
and not get to a place of like, rah, rah, rah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that has to be possible.
Well,
But
and we do. Like I have talked to him. I'm actually not he's the most important one to me, if I'm being honest, but I
mhm,
love everybody. Everyone that sees this that is an old friend of mine, please don't think I don't love you. It's just my dad's special. But I have a lot of friends from the past. I went to a Mormon college, and many of
mm,
my friends from that time, we still talk, and we still talk about things that we have different feelings and different understandings about.
mm,
And here's my challenge: everyone, and I'm going to say this not lightly. I usually like to avoid everyone, anyone, all that, but everyone can think of a belief they held to be true that has changed. If you have had a romantic relationship even once, you thought that person was the bee's knees, and then you thought maybe
no.
not so much. So, so
So, hopefully this
right?
yeah.
We've all had that experience of believing something completely fully and then
Mhm,
realizing that we understand it in a different way. And so that's the other
yeah.
part of it, is that if you're authentic, I personally believe, once again, your values don't change. Who I was as a Mormon and who I am as a queer activist, my values are actually the same. How I express them is very different. And I know I've changed my mind about things, or changed how I understand my values can be expressed. So
Mm.
if I can do that, then that means that whatever I'm holding up as the red cape for the bull to attack today, tomorrow I might not have a thing about it, or maybe in 3 years. So I don't have to be quite that extreme, and then I can step back and listen. And it's like this idea that maybe I'm not right.
Ugh. You have a special way, a gift of being able to share an idea and give real, usable, easy to connect with examples. Because the moment you said there's probably somebody, I was like, oh yeah, I understand now. I completely see where you're going with this message. I picked up what you put down. I got it. I was like, okay, yeah, that makes great sense. I love how you really explain that. And it's in so many words. It is going through your own sort of self awareness journey and realizing that we're all evolving.
Hopefully.
So we're not saying, well, hope, yes, hope. Hopefully, because I know, like, you hate to say, like, we're all it's like, well, yeah, some of you guys. Okay, let me not do it. Let me not do it. Okay, so I do want to do this. Can we talk about if we'll add it in there? We'll talk about creating a guest filter or even operating in different spaces. We want to talk about doing the work. All right, so we've been discussing great deal about showing up authentically. And I really appreciate the part where you mentioned choice, and having that armor. Because there are different situations that make it's nothing is ever so black and white.
Mm-mm.
I mean, it's
Unfortunately.
really shades of gray. Really, yeah, really shades of gray. So, what advice do you have for our viewers in regards to developing a guest filter or knowing when to make, I guess I can't even go with knowing to make these choices, but choosing what's best for them.
Hmm. Well, and I think that I thought about this a lot, and I think some of it is, understanding. So, like discretion, privacy, secrecy, right? They're all
Mm,
different ways that we manage how we share information, or even because we all have that. The places that we do it unconsciously are places that don't stress us out, right? Like when my children were young, there are certain things I didn't tell them. Like if I was having trouble with money or something, they didn't need
yeah.
that. It wasn't their responsibility, but I wouldn't feel like I was hiding something. I would just be making the adult choice, right? Like
Mhm.
when my mother had dementia, I mean, I actively lied to her, which I worked with a therapist around that because, I mean, and it felt bad. And it, talking to her about things, she couldn't handle the truth. Like, not in the Jack Nicholson, you can't handle the truth from way, but just,
Yeah.
but literally, I had to re engage in how I engaged with her because of the situation that she was in.
Mm,
And so I think the difference with a social issue, right, and these other things is that there's a way somehow that, like, when I before I came out, um, I felt like I was hiding things from people that I cared about, and that felt bad. I didn't want to be lying to them. And at the same
Yeah.
time, I was afraid they'd reject me. I didn't actually talk to part of my family for almost 9 years because I was afraid they would reject me, and I just didn't feel like I could handle it. And one of the places that I got to in that scenario was sort of the difference between sort of coming out, which is this really awkward thing. Hi, let me tell
Mhm.
you about who I like to date, versus being out, which is in a social situation, being clear that I know who I am and what my life is,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
what I would consider to be reasonable to share in that
Mhm.
situation, regardless. And so that level of privacy or discretion, what would I talk about? Would I tell my family the details of my finances over dinner? Probably not. So I don't need to
Yeah.
tell them the details of my romantic life over dinner. However, I might say, I got a new job. So therefore, I might say, I'm dating a new person and talk about them a little bit. Because I think that's the part of it is we get caught up in the topic, but we actually do this all the time. And
Yeah.
so figuring out how to understand what that level of privacy or discretion that we tend to, because
Mm.
like my best friend and I, we talk about everything. I would not want, I would not talk about things with my family the way I talk about them with my best friend. It's just the way it is. They want to, I don't want to.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think that's the other part of it is we don't have a lot of one of the things that you and I talked about before, we don't have a lot of modeling. And so the modeling
Yeah.
is either like emotionally vomit all over everyone, which just feels gross to everybody involved. I don't care what the
Mm.
topic is. Or say nothing and hide, which actually also feels really gross to everybody.
Yeah.
Nobody wants you
Yeah.
to be sitting there squishing yourself into the tiniest box you've ever lived in, nor do they want all of the details of everything about anything. No, just your BFF and your journal.
That I was sitting here thinking about when you said, discretion. And I kind of wonder, no, there's not a wonder. There is this assumption, because it is an assumption, that, with social networks, media's platforms, some of us don't know where to draw that line in discretion.
Mhm.
And we say everything is great. It's like, is it? Is it really? Do we really need to know all of that? Do we? I mean, I have to admit, I did go on and I started com- I'm gonna say I started expressing myself in the regard to the prices of certain garments that only women have
Mhm.
to deal with.
Hmm.
And then I thought, but there's a lot of women in my tribe, so I'm sure that they, so certain things you're like, yeah, I can talk about that, and it wouldn't be so bad. But there'd be other things that I probably wouldn't. But I can definitely see where there is that place of what do we want to share? Why are we sharing it?
Mhm. Does
Because in that exact same deal, you can easily go from I just want to share it with you because it's like heavy on my heart to I'm looking for something extra,
Mhm.
just a little. It's like I didn't need to know all of that, but no, I'm not going to thank you for taking that time. No, I'm not going to do it.
Mhm.
But I love that idea of thinking about discretion and privacy and knowing just what not to say.
Yeah.
You know, depending on who you're with and where you are. There are just, I mean, there's clearly some stuff that I say to myself in this room that I just wouldn't say elsewhere.
Yeah.
And when I'm driving, I admit when I am driving, I am certain that I have crossed a lot of roads.
That's fair, right?
Nothing really awful.
Mhm.
Nothing really awful, but my mother's
Mhm.
a senior citizen and she drives 35 miles an hour. So I'm not going to say that I don't say that people drive like my mother, and that's not necessarily the most positive comment right there. So let me do this. First of all, thank you so much, Aicila, for sharing your advice in these actually beautiful examples that are real life that everyone who is watching truly can connect with and see how they can get in there and do the work and figure out to make better choices, to I'm going to say choose spaces that are even better for them, and even develop that guest filter. If people wanted to connect with you and learn more about what you do, where can they find you?
Well, thank you so much for your kind words and for inviting me to be on the show on this topic. It's truly a delight. And I'm so excited to have had this opportunity with you. And the best places to find me are my website, which I'm going to spell, although I think my name's up here, Bicurean, BICUREAN.com. And then also my podcast, Business as Unusual, is on Apple and Spotify and all the other places, but it's also on that website. And I would love to have folks stop in, say hi, share their thoughts. I'm constantly curious about how folks find that balance for themselves, because it can be
Mm. Mm.
really challenging to, like I said, I fall into people pleasing just like anybody. I'm not going to pretend I've got this down. I just have some tools and ways that I've developed that help me feel more like I can live in alignment, which lets me do and be more in my life.
Oh, goodness. I could talk to you all day and make t-shirts from everything you just said. So let me say this to all the viewers who have tuned in today. Thank you for tuning in with us. And remember to give yourself the space and grace to grow and learn. Have a good day.